Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to talk about 5 tips that you need to keep in mind when buying a TV. And no, I'm not going to go into the standard set of tips that you've probably seen in other videos. This is going to be very specific to certain use cases and certain questions that a lot of people ask me, which is like, what is the right screen size? Should I go in for a larger screen size or a TV with a smaller screen size but of a better brand or of a higher price tag? Should I consider HDR for a TV, especially when you're on a budget, so on and so forth. So we are going to answer a couple of questions, but rather than answering the questions that people have been asking me, I thought I will give them to you as these 5 tips to keep in mind when buying a TV. And of course, starting with number 1, the most important is the screen size. Now, people will have different tips and different theories on what screen size to go for. I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm going to tell you about the best experience that you can get based on the viewing distance. Now, there are different maths that people have for viewing distance, but with my experience, what I can tell you is that you just divide by 10. So let's say if you are going in for a 55-inch TV, your minimum viewing distance should be 5.5 feet. Anything closer and the TV will look big. But what should the maximum distance be? Now, for a great cinematic experience, I would suggest just add maximum 3 feet to that. So with a 55-inch TV, you divide it by 10, so that's the minimum viewing distance is 5.5 feet, and you plus 3, so that's about 8.5 feet is your maximum viewing distance from a 55-inch TV, beyond which you start to feel that the TV is a little too small, you aren't getting the best immersive experience, so on and so forth, whatever excuses you can come up with for not having purchased a bigger TV. But my formula is simple. So if you're going in for a 65-inch TV, your minimum viewing distance should be 6.5 feet, and of course adding 3 feet to that, your maximum viewing distance can be 9.5, even 10 feet in that case. So this is a simple thing you can keep in mind, and if you really aren't sure, I think you should go to a showroom and maybe get someone to switch on just that one TV that you're looking at. Look at that screen size, maybe go back that distance, sit down and take an experience for a little bit of time. I know a lot of offline stores that do let you do this. So that was about the viewing distance. The second thing is check for the connectivity options that you need. Now, a couple of years ago, for example, I had a very good pair of Mackie Studio monitors which were brilliant with their sound, but for television I needed the TV to have a 3.5mm connectivity option, which, if you may notice, a lot of budget TVs today do not give you that option. They've kind of started omitting 3.5mm, and if 3.5mm aux connectivity is important to you, then make sure that the TV has that connectivity option. What you shouldn't be too worried about is the number of HDMI ports, but you should definitely consider whether you want eARC or just ARC. A lot of Xiaomi TVs, for example, come with eARC, but there are other budget TVs that only give you ARC. With enhanced audio return channel, you can take advantage of a Dolby Atmos soundbar in the future, and it future-proofs your TV a little bit, whereas ARC will not give you the ability to take advantage of higher bandwidth soundbars that are available out there in the market. So this is one thing to actually keep in mind. But if it comes to the number of HDMI ports, I would suggest that you can go in for something like 3 HDMI ports instead of 4, because you do get something that is an HDMI switcher. So you can get them from 2, 3 and even 4 HDMI ports, and HDMI switches are very easily available. I'm going to put links to a couple of them that are available on Amazon in the description box below. But know that you can simply connect it to your TV and connect additional devices like a Blu-ray player or even a gaming console or your set-top box to the switcher, so you have more HDMI ports. Just one thing to keep in mind is that sometimes external devices like a Fire TV stick may not work due to DRM and copyright reasons, to simplify it. But because of DRM, some external streaming sticks may not work with a switcher, so keep that in mind. But if you need more ports for additional devices on your TV, you can consider a switcher. Third up is don't be fooled by marketing jargons, and I'm going to focus on 2 of them which I think are very important. The first is MEMC 120 Hz and the other one is active HDR. HDR is a standard for high dynamic range, and you have HDR 10, 10 plus. You also have Dolby Vision IQ, but there are a lot of random terms like active HDR or supports HDR, which you have to actually check if it is a legitimate standard that the TV supports. Otherwise, the HDR experience is going to be quite poor, and we are going to talk about HDR more in another point. The other one is 120 Hz. Now, if you're someone that's looking for a budget gaming TV, there are some of them from Hisense, for example, that support a native 120 Hz display. But some television makers actually marketed or advertise their TVs as to supporting MEMC 120Hz display, and these are not 120Hz displays. If you connect a gaming console like a PS5 or an Xbox Series X, for example, you will notice that the TV does not support 120Hz, and that's because to support 120Hz you need HDMI 2.1 connectivity, which is very important. And if you are going to look for HDMI 2.1, you are going to look at the slightly more expensive or higher tier TVs. Some Samsung TVs, for example, on a budget come with one HDMI 2.1 port, but this is something you actually need to actively keep an eye on, because as smart as the HDMI standard is, the people that control it have actually said that every port now can be called HDMI 2.1 so long as it supports the features that are offered on HDMI 2.0, which are a lot. So a TV does not have to support 120Hz natively, but the marketing material can still tell you that it supports HDMI 2.1. So you might want to be careful of these marketing jargons and do a little more research on what features the TV actually supports natively. Now, coming to the point I made about HDR, don't keep HDR as a priority when you're purchasing a budget TV. If you're going on the higher spectrum of things, if you're looking at something from Sony, Samsung, LG, or even the Mi QLED TV 75, for example, or the latest OnePlus Q2, for example, then yes, you can consider HDR as an important factor. But if you're on a really tight budget, I would suggest that if you have access to a TV in an offline store that you're prospecting, go and check if you can switch HDR off, because trust me, when you watch a movie on Netflix, for example, with HDR on and off, you will find that the experience with HDR off is a much better experience, especially in dark sequences where SDR tends to perform a lot better on these budget TVs. Now, there are a lot of TVs on a budget that do let you switch off HDR, but there are a lot of TVs that don't. And in this case, if you find the HDR experience to be lacking, you may want to invest in a device like a Fire TV Stick, where in the settings you can actually manually control to switch HDR off, watch content in SDR on a budget TV, and that will always give you a much better experience. Last but not the least is keep a little bit of headroom for an external streaming device or even a soundbar. Now, when it comes to televisions, one of the biggest compromises that has happened from the old days till now is as TVs have grown slimmer, there is less space to put big drivers for audio. And while flagship TVs from Sony, LG and Samsung have figured out ways to get new technology in their TVs for better sound, traditional TVs like the budget TVs that you get will be slim, and with 20 or 30 or in some cases even 40 watts of sound output may not sound that great if you are looking for a cinematic experience. They may be okay for watching news and regular TV shows, but for movies and gaming, I would suggest that you invest in a nice soundbar. And you could get a good soundbar starting at as low as 15 to 17,000 rupees. I wouldn't suggest something a lot cheaper, because we're looking at you investing in this for a long term. But hey, if you have a specific budget in mind, let me know in the comment section below and I'll do my best to recommend a soundbar in that price range. The second thing, and speaking from experience, I had the Sony W950D for almost 6 odd years, and in that TV, after the first 2-3 years, the OS started lagging to such an extent that I had to invest in a Fire TV Stick. And I have seen so many people that have had TVs for almost a decade, and rather than upgrading the TV when the smart OS becomes slower, they just invest in a Fire TV Stick. And you may want to keep that handy, especially keeping the previous point I spoke about, which is HDR, in mind. So if you ever want to experiment with switching HDR off, or in some cases if you would invest in the Fire TV Stick 4K and you are getting your first 4K HDR TV, for example, and the smart OS isn't that best, or you have a great monitor that you want to exploit with some OTT content, then that Fire TV Stick will always come in handy. Honestly, there are a lot of options from Realme. You have Google's own Chromecast, you have the Apple TV, you have the Fire TV Stick. I'd recommend the Fire TV Stick because I think it is just a great device overall, and it has a good price to performance to value ratio, in my opinion. So there you have it, guys. Those were 5 simple tips to keep in mind when purchasing a new TV. As always, you can let me know what you thought of this video in the comment section below. And for more from the world of home entertainment, you can subscribe to the channel. We will catch you in another video. It's goodbye for now.